For the most part, chain of command, World War II, the Army lists are fixed, meaning based on the time period and the scenario, you're going to get a set list. But then you have some support points, 3, 8, 5, again, depending on the scenario, or perhaps you and your opponent agree at time, hey, let's spend 12 support points. And you can select a number of units. Infantry, heavy weapons teams, tanks, fortifications, minefields, off-table air support, barrages, a whole bunch of things. Very, very tactical. You can be sure if you've been following any of my podcasts for a reasonable amount of time, I love tanks. I love tanks. That's why I love playing late war, both Germans and Americans, because there's a lot of really, really interesting tanks. So it makes sense to open up a little bit of a tactical discussion regarding tanks in chain of command, and in the right circumstances, just how fearsome they are. Not even from the perspective of, certainly a Tiger or a King Tiger is very, very scary, but even a humble Panzer III, if it can get into position, it can really drive out and force infantry. But that said, World War II tactics and the terrain in historical wargaming, we're going to touch a little bit on that too, means tanks are very, very vulnerable to ambushes, especially if you have one of those chain of command dice at the ready. So the first question, of course, is when do you bring the tank on? You're rolling your dice. You have the ability to activate a junior officer, bring it on, or perhaps a support choice, bring it on. I like to bring my tank on immediately. If I can get turn 1 for the mission, or I'm going second, the second that the activation dice turns up, I'm bringing it on. Simply because at long range, meaning on my side of the table, where my jump-off points are somewhat secure and my opponent's jump-off points are on their side of the deployment table, the only thing I have to worry about is essentially another tank. And yes, that's a worry, but that is at an extreme range. I don't have to worry about any infantry. They just don't have the range with the anti-tank weapons. And this is where things get interesting in chain of command versus other wargaming systems. Chain of command, the range of modern weaponry is essentially unlimited, meaning the entire table, if you can see it, you can shoot it. You can shoot at it. It might be out in the open. It might get light cover. It might have hard cover. There's a short effective range, which is going to make it easier to hit. And then there's the longer range, but you still have a decent chance of hitting. This is why an infantry squad laying down fire with a machine gun can score some decent hits on the other side of the table. The tank is immune because the anti-tank weaponry, there's an effective range. It's a very narrow band. Now, again, depending on the tech, are we talking about Panzer Faust, Panzer Schreck? Are we talking about a bazooka? You have a lower range band where if you can shoot, 8 to 12 inches in the lower range band, it's going to just burn through that tank. At a longer range band up to, again, depending on the weapon, up to 24, it's not as effective. It's not as effective. It doesn't mean take the shot, but we don't have to worry about someone on the opposite side of the table shooting a bazooka, hitting your tank. So bringing it on early on, if I can bring it on, get it into a decent enough position where it has the firing arc on the rest of the table, and go into Overwatch, or next turn go into Overwatch, essentially I've just created a nice little fortification, a nice little bunker. I like going into Overwatch early on because, especially the German tanks, they're going to have a hull mounted machine gun, not as effective as the 50 caliber on the Shermans. But equally so, the ability to have that put on Overwatch means essentially any infantry unit that comes on, I'm going to activate that Overwatch. If a tank comes on, I'm going to burn that anti-tank round. I'm going to take that shot. Now, when a tank comes on, so my tanks, they're going to be static. They're going to be on Overwatch. They're going to be waiting. They're going to be trying to stay as far back as possible. If an enemy tank comes on, I will try to engage it at range, but then I want to definitely start moving because it makes it harder to hit in the armor adjustments based on how the tank is moved. So at that point, I want to keep moving. When do you advance with a tank? Because infantry, again, really can't do anything to a tank. And pushing up on your opponent's jump-off points and really leveraging that tank, that's huge. That is very, very fearsome. But you have to be ready for anti-tank to engage that. Again, bazookas, depending on which side you're on. I advance when two things have to happen ideally. These are the ideal situations. Obviously, sometimes the mission dictates something a little different. I want to have an infantry squad on the table. I'd like to have some sort of other support, usually MG42 team, some sort of team backing that. So this way I've got the machine gun ready to back, throw some dice on the table. I can advance the tank and I can advance the infantry in support behind. I also want to have a chain of command die for an interrupt. Now, tactically speaking, it's probably best to spend the interrupt to not force a roll on the morale table to see what you lose. When you lose a unit, when heavy support gets destroyed or blown up, or an infantry unit breaks and runs off the table, or a senior leader, junior leader gets killed, you make a roll, and that's going to bring down your command dice structure. Spending chain of command dice to prevent that, yes, absolutely. I mean, ideally, I'd like to generate one or two before I take any serious action, but I at least want to have one in the pocket ready to go. So this way, as I advance with that tank, with the infantry in support, if an anti-tank unit does appear, right, to either deploys or ambushes, I can interrupt and hit them. And what they hit them with really depends on, do I hit them with the infantry or do I hit them with the tank? Depends on the target. Depends on what I'm shooting at. Is it a bazooka team? Is it an anti-tank gun with a shield on it? Is it possibly another tank that was hiding or comes into deployment? With that, though, that's when I push forward with the tank. But in the beginning of the game, especially if your opponent doesn't have armor, doesn't have another tank, to be able to sit back there and just pound away, essentially with a high explosive round, or to sit there and pound away, that offers a lot. And you begin to really see tactically just how scary tanks are in the game compared to, and I love Warhammer 40,000. Warhammer 40,000 tanks, they're just kind of like infantry units, only with more wounds. And anything can take them out. And they're a little bit scary because they put out some firepower, but it's not like this Tiger tank is advancing and I literally have nothing to stop it. And if that's not bad enough, there's a whole bunch of infantry pushing up behind it. What the heck am I going to do? I'm here. I need to win the mission. What am I going to do? How am I going to do that? How you could do that, on a side note, this is kind of building into tank tactics, right? On a side note, if you make the decision where you're not going to play armor to counter it, or based on the mission, based on the tech level, you don't really feel like you have the anti-tank. You look, Fritz is bringing not one Tiger. He's just a jerk. He's bringing two. I don't know why I agreed to a 16 support point game, but pushing that out on the table, tanks and chain of command, historically, building on that historical rule set, they are very vulnerable to getting stuck in the ground. So when you cross over into certain terrain, hedgerows, moving off-road, moving through buildings, there's a chance to get stuck. And of course, you have a chance to break free, but there's an equal chance where now you're stuck for the game, and essentially the tank is immobilized. So if I'm going up against armor, are there places on the table, which is easier than you think, because historical wargaming, again, drawing a parallel to Warhammer 40K, yes, Warhammer 40,000, there's some amazing gaming tables. I mean, there's some Cities of Death and ruin tables that just are absolutely showcase fantastic. But many 40K games, for the size of their army, there is not enough terrain. I almost feel like I'm playing X-Wing miniatures. You got like 3 or 4 pieces on the table. These massive armies, like there's no tactica. It's just rolling dice. Historical wargaming, historicals, whether they're DBA, DBN, Napoleonics, or Chain of Command, you're looking to recreate the battlefields as they existed. So if you look at a World War II gaming table, there's hedgerows, there's rows, there's buildings, there's forests, there's fields. There's a lot of places to get stuck, to get bogged down, to get ambushed. So ideally speaking, if I don't have the direct way to stop a tank, then can I at least look to slow it down? Can I at least look to maybe get it immobilized? It's still going to have its turret. It still might have some machine guns, depending on the location of the hull of its facing. But it makes things a little bit easier. Side note, flamethrower units against a tank, against a vehicle. This is where you get a little bit of balance. I have to say, Chain of Command World War II is very, very balanced. I think they implemented a lot of the rules in different military units where they're all playable with enough differences that you feel really like you're playing the nation that you're representing. That said, flamethrower units are beyond terrifying in that they just destroy infantry. There's no cover. If you can spray a vehicle, most likely the crew is going to bail out. The balance to that is being a support choice and a special team. So usually it's a 2 or 3 man team. They exist as they exist. So outside of an ambush, look, as soon as you pull that flamethrower team on there, whether it's American or German, I'm going to blast it. I'm going to blast it off the table. So really you see it as a reactive interrupt. You see it as an interrupt. The changing side to that is the German flame tanks, where it's a tank with the flamethrower for the main barrel. Historically there, my understanding historically, I mean, it exists in the game, but my understanding historically is they were not used as much. The Germans didn't use them as much, where in the game, in theory, I could spend the support choice and take it all the time. And I did do it for a little while, but I found it not to be that fun because you're mounting it on a tank, which means effectively anti-tank weapons, whether they're man-portable, a team, or another tank, is the only thing that can take it out. And the range is insane. The range is absolutely insane compared to a foot team. So you just roll up, bake everybody in the building. You just roll up, hit a tank, hit a vehicle, crew bails out. I have to say, and I don't mean this from a criticism because I think Chain of Command is one of the best rule sets out there, it does feel very, it is an imbalance. It does feel like an auto win. If anything should be possibly house ruled, possibly that. So definitely some considerations. I'm always taking tanks. I'm always playing tanks. I love machine gun teams too. I love snipers. The other off-table support stuff, I think it has a use, but that is where I'm spending my support choices.